The story number 1, The Watcher in the Shadows. Working the night shift at a corporate office in Raleigh, North Carolina was never my first choice, but it was the only schedule that fit my classes. Most nights the building was eerily quiet, with only the flickering fluorescent lights illuminating the vast, empty space around me. It was unsettling, yes, but at the same time the solitude offered a strange sense of peace. I could concentrate without the usual distractions and get a lot of work done. However, one Friday night changed everything. It was around 2 a.m. as I sat at my desk, fingers flying over the keyboard, when I was jolted by a sudden sound. It was just a crack, something that could have easily come from the settling walls of the building, but the eeriness of the night made my heart race. I brushed it off and focused on my work again, but moments later, I was startled again, this time by the unmistakable sound of a computer booting up from the other side of the room. Frowning in confusion, I stood on my chair, straining to peer over the cubicle walls. There, in the far corner, the glow of a computer screen illuminated a vacant cubicle, the eerie blue light casting long shadows. My instincts screamed that I was alone in this building, and I felt an unsettling chill creep over me. Against my better judgment, I called out, "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed in the stillness. The glow from the computer flickered and then abruptly went dark. An uneasy knot formed in my stomach. Deciding to stay hidden, I turned off my own desk lamp and computer. I crouched low, tiptoeing cautiously toward the cubicle where the light had been. The building was silent again, but my heart pounded loudly in my chest. I waited for what felt like an eternity, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Finally, I worked up the courage to venture closer, moving silently toward the exit. As I reached the opening near the elevators, my eyes caught something in the corner. There was a man, crouched low behind a potted plant. Dressed in black, he seemed to be watching me, though he hadn't yet noticed I was there. I froze, dread washing over me like ice water. I quickly turned back to the stairwell. There was no way I was waiting for the elevator now. I opened the stairwell door slowly, praying it wouldn't creak, and stepped inside, shutting it quietly behind me. Just as I began to descend the stairs, I heard the door above me burst open, followed by the sound of frantic footsteps racing down after me. Adrenaline surged through me, and I bolted down the stairs, my heart pounding in my throat. Each thud of my feet echoed as I flew down the flights, the footsteps behind me growing louder and more erratic. I finally reached the ground floor, sprinting through the lobby and out the front doors. I glanced back but saw no sign of the man. Panting and shaken, I called the police and one of my bosses, who confirmed that I was the only one scheduled for the night. The police arrived within minutes, scouring the building from top to bottom, but they found nothing. I couldn't provide them with a detailed description beyond a man in all black. For the following week, my boss allowed me to lock all entrances to the office floor, including the elevators. But I still felt that gnawing sense of unease, as if he was lurking just out of sight, watching me. Each creak of the building, every flicker of the lights, set my nerves on edge. I eventually transitioned to daytime shifts, forever changed by that encounter. The fear of what might have happened that night still lingers in my mind. I wonder if he was just passing through, or if he had sinister intentions. I no longer work nights, but the memory of that man in the shadows continues to haunt me. A chilling reminder that sometimes the quietest places hold the darkest secrets. The story number 2, Midnight Intruder. It was around 4 a.m. on a Saturday night when I was jolted awake by the grumbling of my stomach. The late-night snack I had been dreaming of seemed impossible to ignore. With a sigh, I threw off the covers and padded into the kitchen to whip up a quick sandwich. As I entered the dimly lit room, I immediately noticed something was off. One of the cabinets was ajar. Now, I'm meticulous about closing everything after I use it. It's just part of my nature. I stared at the open cabinet, puzzled. Why would I have left it open? A slight chill ran down my spine, and curiosity turned into concern. I ventured through the house, checking closets and corners, half expecting to find an unwanted guest. Everything appeared normal until I stepped into the den. My heart sank as I saw the back door wide open. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. Someone had definitely been inside my house. I hesitated, then forced myself to step outside. The night air was crisp, and I flipped on the patio light, squinting into the darkness. That's when I saw him, a figure slouched in one of the patio chairs. He looked filthy, like he had been living on the streets for months. His long, tangled hair fell around his shoulders, obscuring his face. He stared at me with a blank expression, and for a moment, I couldn't move. What did he want? Slowly, he stood up and began to walk toward me. My mind raced, weighing my options. He didn't seem immediately threatening, but something deep down told me to run. Panic surged through me, and I managed to slam the door shut just as he lunged forward. I locked it, my heart pounding in my chest as we stared at each other through the glass. In that tense moment, I realized I needed to call the cops. I sprinted to the kitchen, fumbling for my phone as adrenaline coursed through me. But when I returned to the den, he was already gone. The patio was empty, but the gnawing feeling in my gut told me he hadn't left far. I called the police and explained the situation, but they found no trace of the intruder. I spent the rest of the night on high alert, jumping at every sound. The eerie encounter left me shaken, and even after the police left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Weeks later, the memory still haunted me. Who was he? What were his intentions? I never found out, but I learned to trust my instincts. I now double-check every door and window before bed, ensuring my sanctuary remains just that, my sanctuary. The story number 3, beneath the surface. A few months ago, I experienced something that still sends chills down my spine. I live in a quiet suburb, a place where everyone knows their neighbors and doors are rarely locked. But that all changed for me one dark February night. I have a charging outlet under my bed, which I often use to keep my phone charged. Each night, I would place my phone on the ledge above my bed, using it as my alarm. It was a routine that I relied on until one fateful Monday night when everything changed. I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone's alarm blasting through the darkness. Confused, I glanced at my desk clock, which read 4 a.m. I felt a wave of disorientation wash over me. Had I accidentally set an alarm? The title on my phone's alarm simply read down. I dismissed it as a fluke and went back to sleep, not thinking much of it at the time. But the next night, the same thing happened. This time, I woke up to my phone's alarm again, but the clock showed 3 a.m., and the alarm title was beneath. There was no way I had set that. Surely my brother must have been playing a prank on me. The next morning, I asked my dad to tell him to cut it out. I needed my sleep for school. But my dad insisted he hadn't touched it, and I started to believe him. Feeling uneasy, I took precautionary measures. That night, I set a password on my phone and jotted it down on a sticky note, which I hid behind my bed. I made sure no alarms were set except for one at 8 a.m. But yet again, I was awakened in the dark at 2 a.m. The alarm blared, titled "The." A cold fear crept into my stomach. I was convinced someone was tampering with my phone. The next day, I turned my phone off completely, hoping that whoever was behind this would lose interest. That night, I relied on my old-fashioned alarm clock instead. I set it for 8 a.m. and drifted into sleep, only to wake up again in darkness, my heart racing. My alarm clock was off, and I couldn't see the time. But my phone was blaring an eerie, distorted scream instead of its usual ringtone. Panicking, I quickly turned off the alarm titled "Bed." The clock on my phone showed it was 1 a.m. A feeling of dread washed over me. I reached down to grab my charger from under the bed, only to find that it was missing. Then, I pieced together the terrifying puzzle. The titles of the 4 alarms formed a sentence, down beneath the bed. In that moment, terror gripped me. I tried to pull my arm back, but it was too late. A hand grabbed my wrist, squeezing tightly. I screamed at the top of my lungs, desperate for help. My parents' bedroom door burst open, and I heard my dad's hurried footsteps racing toward my room. When my dad opened the door, he stood there, baseball bat in hand, eyes wide with concern. He immediately dove for the space under my bed, where a figure was half-crouched, struggling to pull me down. Without hesitation, he swung the bat and connected, knocking the intruder out cold. When the police arrived, they confirmed my worst fears. The man had been living beneath my bed, a registered sex offender with a lengthy criminal record. He was known for stalking and terrifying his victims, clearly deriving pleasure from it. That night changed everything for me. I was left shaken, feeling violated in my own home. I had never imagined that a space I considered safe could harbor such darkness. The experience taught me a harsh lesson about vigilance and the importance of knowing who or what might be lurking just beneath the surface. The story number 4 and last story of the day, the disturbing call. I thought I was just having a normal day. My friend Marcus and I usually chatted or hung out every day. We had been through a lot together, and nothing could shake our bond. But on one fateful day, everything changed. Marcus didn't respond to my texts or calls, which was completely out of character for him. As the hours ticked by, a gnawing anxiety settled in my stomach. After some time, I decided to check on him. His house was only a block away, so I walked over, ringing the doorbell repeatedly and knocking with growing urgency. The familiar sound of his laughter was absent, and though his car was parked in the driveway, there was no sign of life. I felt a strange mix of concern and frustration. Maybe he just needed some time alone, but that thought didn't sit well with me. As night crept in, I received a FaceTime call from an unknown number. My heart raced. Hesitantly, I answered, pointing the camera away from my face. When I finally looked at the screen, relief washed over me. It was Marcus. But my relief quickly turned to unease as I took in his disheveled appearance. He looked pale, with dark bags under his eyes, and a look of sheer panic etched across his face. The room behind him was unfamiliar, filled with shadows that made the air feel heavy. "Marcus, where are you?" I asked, my voice tinged with worry. "I'm fine. I'm at home," he said, but the way he avoided eye contact told me otherwise. "Whose phone are you using?" I pressed. There was a long silence, and for a moment he simply stared blankly at the camera. "It's my cousin's," he finally replied, but I could see the fear lurking behind his eyes. Before I could ask more questions, Marcus abruptly demanded, "I need $10,000. Can you send it?" I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but as I observed his serious expression, my laughter faded. "Why do you need that much money?" "Just send it," he insisted, his voice trembling. The urgency in his tone sent a chill down my spine. "Marcus, this isn't like you. What's really going on?" He didn't answer, just continued to stare into the camera, as if waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the call ended. I sat there in disbelief, my heart racing. Something was clearly wrong, and I felt a rising panic. I resolved to check on him first thing in the morning. The next day, I arrived at his house and rang the doorbell repeatedly, but there was no answer. Frustrated and worried, I gave up and went home. That evening, just as I was about to fall asleep, another FaceTime call from an unknown number interrupted me. "Marcus," I exclaimed as I answered, but the relief I felt was quickly overshadowed by horror. He looked even worse than before. His hair was a tangled mess, and there was a cut on his forehead. Panic gripped my chest. "I need $10,000. Send it to this address," he demanded again, his voice shaky. "Marcus, calm down. What's happening?" I pleaded, but he wouldn't tell me. "Come on, don't point a gun at my back," he said, his voice rising with fear. My heart dropped. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. It was as if a dagger had pierced my heart at his words, and I instinctively interpreted the slight twitch of his left eye as a desperate plea for help. The call cut off abruptly, leaving me in shock. I grabbed my phone and scrambled to remember the address he had mentioned. With trembling hands, I dialed the police, relaying everything I knew. They assured me they would send someone right away. Time stretched endlessly as I waited for news. Finally, the police called back. They had found Marcus, barely conscious, in the basement of an abandoned house miles away. They reported that he had been severely beaten and his captors were long gone. When I rushed to the hospital, a whirlwind of emotions crashed over me. I was terrified of what I might see. Marcus lay in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily. I sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. "Marcus, I'm here," I whispered, my voice breaking. He opened his eyes slowly, and the flicker of recognition brought a small measure of comfort. "What happened?" he croaked. I leaned in closer, desperate to know what he had gone through. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. Just know you're safe now." Days turned into weeks, and Marcus struggled to piece together the fragments of that horrifying night. He described walking home, feeling a sudden blow to the back of his head, and then waking up in a dimly lit basement with strange voices echoing around him. "I thought I was going to die," he confessed one day, tears streaming down his cheeks. "They kept asking for money, saying they knew I had it. I couldn't understand what they wanted." "I'm so sorry, man," I said, my heart aching for him. "You're safe now. We'll get through this together." But the scars from that night ran deeper than I could have imagined. Marcus became increasingly paranoid, constantly glancing over his shoulder and avoiding public places. I tried to support him, but the trauma had taken its toll on our friendship. He was a shell of the person I once knew. Then, one day I received a chilling message from him. "They're watching me. I can't sleep. I think they're coming back." A wave of dread washed over me. I raced to his house, pounding on the door. When he finally opened it, he looked like a ghost, his eyes wide with terror. "Marcus, please. You need to talk to someone," I begged, trying to reach the friend I knew. "They won't leave me alone," he said, voice trembling. "I can't trust anyone." I stayed by his side that night, hoping to dispel the shadows that haunted him. We talked about everything, old memories, dreams, and fears, but I could see the darkness still clinging to him. Months passed, and though Marcus gradually sought therapy, the road to recovery was long and fraught with obstacles. He still struggled to find peace, haunted by nightmares and the echoes of that harrowing night. One night, as I lay in bed, I received a call from him. "I think I'm ready to talk about it," he said, his voice shaky. I rushed to his house, my heart hopeful yet apprehensive. As we sat down, I knew this conversation would be a turning point for him. And as he began to share his experience, I realized the strength of our friendship had weathered the storm. Together, we would face the darkness and, hopefully, emerge into the light. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share.